I think the key thing to note is that prior to this, the US has been talking at China, but not talking to China. And even when there was some kind of dialogue, it was like parallel discussions that just completely passed by each other. So this is a real opportunity for the two parties to come together and have a real dialogue, which they haven't had for a very long time. And my hope is that it can build on the Bali consensus. We understand the Bali consensus as the floor from which the dialogue can build. That is to say, we understand that the US is not trying to regime change China, that it's not waging a Cold War against China, that it's not waging or escalating to a hot war, that it is not waging an economic war. Now, these are the kind of basic understandings that were reached in Bali, and it remains to see if they can be built up constructively. Because from where I stand, it looks like there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
There's a famous Chinese song that says, when the friends come, we have fine wine. When the enemy come, we have shotgun. And the difference between the Newsom visit to China is he was praising China's development. He took the high-speed train. Yes. He liked it. You know what? I wish California has gone with China on building the high-speed train, and now today we probably would have a high-speed train in California. And so we do see signs of hope of better times ahead. And hopefully Gavin Newsom's meeting set the tone for the Xi and Biden meeting. Speaking of Bali consensus, I brought out like a piece of Bali here. This is a traditional Indonesian shirt, batik from Bali. And so I hope that spirit of Bali consensus could carry it over to the Xi-Biden meeting in San Francisco. You know, San Francisco where everybody gets along and is a happy place, and hopefully that will create the happy atmosphere we can look forward to in the next couple of days.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to Talk It Out with me, Li Jingjing. This show always tries to show you the different voices and stories from China and the rest of the global south. And normally I do this show in Beijing, but today I'm doing this show, surprise, in San Francisco in the United States. The relationship between China and the US has been going up and down, but recent years the tensions has been escalated to a point that almost there's no trust between the two governments and two leaderships. But there's some signs recently that shows the relationship probably will see a change. A few weeks ago, the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, visited China together with a group of businessmen, politicians from California, tried to promote more trade and cooperations. And this week, the APEC meeting is taking place in San Francisco. World leaders, businessmen from different fields from around the world will meet here. And most importantly, Chinese President Xi Jinping and US President Joe Biden will meet here as well. So what will this have an impact on us? Will this meeting be another meeting in Bali that led to no change, but actually deterioration? So in this episode, I have two awesome guests from the United States joining me to share their perspectives. So these two gentlemen, I will introduce probably the guest today to San Francisco, Carl Zha. I'm sure many of you know him because he's an online sensation. He has, too many followers. Every day I check it's a different number on Twitter. And also he has his own show, Silk and Steel. So Carl, welcome.
Thank you, Jingjing. Thank you for inviting me. I have one question for you. Is that a Golden Gate Bridge earring you are wearing?
No, this is traditional Chinese architecture. This is the rooftop.
Okay, sorry, it's my eyesight.
So bring some Chinese culture to the United States.
We need some culture in the United States. Thank you.
Another great guest. Some of you probably already watched many of his great analysis, great interviews with different media, Breakthrough News, RT. He's my friend, KJ Noh. He's a geopolitical analyst, a great journalist. So KJ, thank you for taking care of me and while I'm in San Francisco as a guest.
Great to see you.
It's so great that because we all connected online for such a long time, it's really the first time that to meet you second time to meet KJ. He was in Beijing a few months ago. I really want to hear your perspective on this. First, let's start with the meeting. All the entire world's attention on this meeting. Will this meeting between our two leaders have a positive outcome? Are you optimistic about this meeting? How about we start with you, Carl?
Well, I think Winston Churchill famously said, "Jaja is better than war." So, talk, even if the talk doesn't yield any measurable, concrete result, is still better than nothing. And U.S. and China hasn't been talking over the past years. And the fact just Xi and Biden are meeting in person, I think that is very important. And there's a possible opening for a new chapter in the U.S.-China relationship. As we all know, the U.S.-China relationship has really hit the rock bottom. And any sign of hope, at this time, that's what we have right now, just hope. And any sign of hope is an encouraging sign, for me at least.
KJ.
Yeah, I agree with Carl. And I think the key thing to note is that prior to this, the US has been talking at China, but not talking to China. And even when there was some kind of dialogue, it was like parallel discussions that just completely passed by each other. So this is a real opportunity for the two parties to come together and have a real dialogue, which they haven't had for a very long time. And my hope is that it can build on the Bali consensus. We understand the Bali consensus as the floor from which the dialogue can build. That is to say, we understand that the US is not trying to regime change China, that it's not waging a Cold War against China, that it's not waging or escalating to a hot war, that it is not waging an economic war, and that it is not trying to subvert and provoke war over Taiwan. Now, these are the kind of basic understandings that were reached in Bali, and it remains to see if they can be built up constructively, because from where I stand, it looks like there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Like what kind of work needs to be done?
Well, to put it very simply, for example, let's think of no economic war. The US has been waging, among other things, chip sanctions. And the New York Times describes these chip sanctions as an act of war. Literally, they describe it as an attempt to extirpate, root and branch, China's technological development. That is to not simply freeze China's technological development, but to roll it back, to actually make it devolve. And the US has not lessened any of these actions. In fact, it's tightened them even further. So even as it makes these nice-sounding diplomatic overtures, if we step back and look at the actions, the hostile intentions are still very present.
I think this time the visit from the Californian politicians is a little bit different from the previous visits from the US government officials. Like, remember the meeting in Alaska, Blinken was trying to lecture Chinese delegations, even though they were like, we're looking for cooperations, but we're concerned about the human rights situations in your country, we said that, so trying to give a lecture. So Chinese diplomats didn't, especially calling them out loud in front of media. So that basically was the break all the cooperations back then. But a few years later, this time we see something different. At least the impressions among Chinese people towards Gavin Newsom, the Californian governor's visit, is quite positive because he was friendly, he was respectful when he was in China, and he said a lot of good things, positive things about the nature or the business or technology development. Well, he was basically respectful, like he was genuine looking for cooperations. And so many other politicians from California also did the same. And this time, I think the reason that the two leaders can meet, agreeing with meeting, is also they decided to put aside the differences, put the tone down, and try to have a rational discussion. Do you agree, Carl?
I think there is definitely that because, as you pointed out, the previous U.S. official that has been sent by Biden administration to Beijing, they tend to lecture, to talk to Beijing, like KJ was saying, and they use the Beijing visit as a podium to speak to their own domestic audience in the United States, and that's very grating for the Chinese host. One of the very important key to relationship in China is a reciprocality. There's a famous Chinese song that says, when the friends come, we have fine wine. When the enemy come, we have shotgun. Mm-hmm. And the difference between the Newsom visit to China is he was praising China's development. He took the high-speed train. Yes. He liked it. You know what? I wish California has gone with China on building the high-speed train, and now today we probably would have a high-speed train in California, and so we do see signs of hope of a better times ahead, and hopefully Kevin Newsom's meeting set the tone for the Xi and Biden meeting. Speaking of Bali consensus, I brought out like a piece of Bali here. This is a traditional Indonesian shirt, batik from Bali, and so I hope that spirit of Bali consensus could carry it over to the Xi Biden meeting in San Francisco. San Francisco where everybody gets along and it's a happy place, and hopefully that will create the happy atmosphere we can look forward to in the next couple of days.
We forgot to mention that since you mentioned the Bali consensus, you are like almost half Balinese, right?
My better half, I didn't bring her here. But yes, I'm married to a Balinese woman. I now have a son. I have settled down on the island, the beautiful tropical paradise of Bali.
So you were in Bali when the two leaders met in Bali. Yes. Now when the leaders are going to meet in San Francisco, you're in San Francisco again. Are you the one?
I didn't plan it. I did not plan it, but yes, it did happen.
Also, another assumption is because why U.S. suddenly now want to stabilize the relationship with China now, because before it was sanctions, cheap wars, trade wars, but now there are people saying, scholars saying, because there's a conflict in Europe between Russia and Ukraine, there's a huge conflict between Israel and Palestine, and the world is being divided by the two huge conflicts and suffering the consequences economically, and not just economically, on many levels. The world are very divided. So probably the administration in the US, okay, we cannot afford another war in the South China Sea over Taiwan. Do you agree?
I think that the US has its hands full, and there are only so many wars it can wage at the same time. I think we have to understand that originally the pivot to Asia, which was declared actually 12 years ago, not far from this date, on November 17th, 2011, it was declared in Canberra by Obama. And here the US mapped out its plan to contain, encircle, and to roll back, bring down China. And this intention was very clear, and at the same time, you could see that there was a war doctrine that was also built out. And there was also a plan of economic warfare called the Trans-Pacific Partnership. All of these things were rolled out. And when the conflict broke out in Russia and Ukraine, there was a group of the ruling imperial elite that simply saw Russia as an appetizer. China is the ultimate goal. We're still moving towards China. We're pivoting towards China, and Russia will be just the appetizer that we walk over. And that didn't turn out to be the case. And the US is both bogged down in the Ukraine as a proxy war. Clearly it's not going well. And then we had the Middle East, from which the United States was hoping that everything was going along their way. Jake Sullivan said that, it hasn't been this calm for a very, very long time. And so that was supposed to be stabilized, and the idea was actually to pivot towards China and to escalate in all dimensions of warfare. Most notably, the biggest signal of this was the constant information warfare. This constant propaganda, this constant demonization is a very, very good signal that the US had strong intent to escalate even further. But then when these two other situations broke out and became unmanageable, my opinion is that the US is doing a kind of tactical retreat, a tactical retrenchment. It's still on the same train, but it stopped the train for a little moment and it's stopping to refuel. But I think the destination is still the same, that is continued escalation, continued conflict with China.
What if this meeting didn't turn out good? What would happen?
Well, I would expect more of the same. And when I say more of the same, we see there's a pattern in US dialogue with China, which is essentially good cop, bad cop. It's Jekyll and Hyde. They say pleasant things and then they do very deceitful, undermining actions. Or from time to time there's a fairly decent interaction, and then the language immediately after it is very, very denigrating. And so there's this kind of Jekyll and Hyde, good cop, bad cop. It's like roses and flowers, back and forth, back and forth. But ultimately the relationship has the quality of something which is quite abusive and something which is very denigrating. And I think we could see more of the same. And I'll just kind of parenthetically note that this way of communicating, is not simply random, but it is actually a doctrine that came out of the US approach to Afghanistan. It's what they call counterinsurgency. And this counterinsurgency, they referred to it as armed social work. Armed social work. It's like a social worker, but also somebody who's subjugating a population. And the best encapsulation of this is General James Mattis, who said that in Afghanistan, we want to be polite, we want to be professional, and we want to have a plan to kill everybody. And I believe that that is still the larger plan that is, we can think both metaphorically, but also perhaps even literally, that ultimately this is the escalation that they envisage for China.
Carl, you want to add something?
Well, to go on the metaphor of Russia-Ukraine war as an appetizer, I think U.S. found out Russia was a little bit more than they can chew. And on contrary to what Janet Yellen said, that U.S. could afford to fight two-front war, I mean, it's pretty obvious at this point that U.S. cannot afford to fight two-front war. There's rampant inflation. When I came visit the United States, I paid $8 for a frozen banana for my child. And that is just ridiculous. And right now, I do think there's some part of the US elite see this maybe as KJ say, a tactical retreat from the China front so they can allow them more room for maneuvering in other theaters like Ukraine and Middle East. Now that, just to put things in a more hopeful note, I mean, it's true, by the instinct of the empire, it's always, they always plan to not tolerate a peer competitor like China. But again, I think it's still hopeful for the short to medium term that there can be a era of détente between US and China, two superpowers. We can look at historical examples. US-China tensions were very high in 2001. There was a Hainan spy plane incident, and right around the corner, then 9/11 happened. And after that, what happened? US decided to pivot to Middle East, Afghanistan and Iraq. And at that time, US reached a sort of understanding with the Chinese leadership that we're not interested to escalate against China. We're going to maintain a cordial working relationship. That actually led to a decade of quite fruitful cooperation between China and the United States. So we could possibly see that again. Even if it's in some minds of some U.S. planners, this is just a tactical retreat. They're just holding back for later time when they can pivot back to Asia to be more confrontational to China. This will also allow China time and breathing room to develop and concentrate on its own development, which is what China really wants, because China is never really intended to be the world hegemon the way the United States is, to challenge U.S. Unipolar order. That's what United States is afraid of. It's projecting its own fear onto China. What China really wants is the time and space to develop for itself, to develop prosperity for its own citizens. And for that, they need a peaceful environment, international environment. So in this case, I think China's objective and the short-term objective of the United States do seem to match. So I think there is a real possibility for a brief piece of détente if the meeting goes well.
Yes, if. Well, you mentioned the misinformation warfare. So all of us know this very well because we were very active on social networks or on interviews. It's like we were all fighting against this misinformation warfare. Carl, you are doing a wonderful job debunking all the lies. Your show is popular, and I want to hear your perspective as an Asian American, Chinese American in the States. What was the turning point for you to realize, wait, what the media described China is not right? Well, what made you decide to come out? Okay, I need to be the messenger to send the real message about China.
Well, actually, it was that way for me from the very beginning. I came to the United States in 1990 as a teenager, 13-year-old. At that time, I was very hungry for news of my homeland, so I would scour the pages of New York Times to look for any piece of information about China. But the China I read about in New York Times, nothing matches the world that I left behind. It's almost reading like a bizarre world, a parallel universe. I mean, this is not the China that I used to live in. I used to chalk that off to the ignorance of the reporters, just Westerners just don't get China. But later, I realized it's more than that. There's actually an orchestrated campaign of disinformation and propaganda to turn the U.S. public away from a more cooperative relationship, more fruitful relationship with China. And that's when I realized for a bicultural person, a bilingual person like me, I feel obligated to share what I know, my own perspective. Because let's face it, a Chinese perspective is not being presented in the US mainstream media at all. And I just wanted to understand people in the English-speaking world, to understand the other side, to understand the Chinese perspective, to understand the context, the history and development of China, and why would China act the way it is acting right now, rather than getting their sole source from New York Times, Wall Street Journal.
Yeah, KJ, you are a Korean American. Yeah. We are all the victims of the World War II, of the empires for such a long time, and I actually, you defend a lot about China. I mean, that's strange. What made you want to defend China?
Well, I don't see myself as defending China. I believe that I'm simply stating the truth, or if you will, I'm defending the truth. And I feel that that is very important for us as scholars, as journalists, and just persons with integrity. I think that's fundamental. But coming back to this notion of information warfare, I have been tracking this for at least a decade. Starting 2012, I was completely focused as a journalist on this pivot to Asia. And what I see in addition to this continuing military escalation is the continuing ratcheting up of the tenor and the absurdity of the lies against China, the kind of extraordinary demonization of China. And I know enough about war, and I know enough about propaganda, that war has several dimensions or several stages. Before there is a shooting war or a kinetic war, there is a pre-kinetic dimension. This is the pre-kinetic war. And that pre-kinetic war is information warfare. And as you see this escalate, and as you see it escalate to the level of kind of WMD or genocide, then you know that we're very, very close to kinetic war. We saw that with the Iraq War, we've seen that with other wars, and we see the same kind of exaggeration and ultra-demonization, which is very, very symptomatic of the strategy they uses when it is rolling out a campaign to manufacture consent to engage in kinetic war. The other dimension that you can also notice is that, for example, in actual war, before the infantry goes in, you send in the air and you create a no-fly zone and you prevent any defenses from happening. The same thing happens on a kind of cognitive level as a country prepares for war. That is to say, it sends in the media and it destroys any capacity for the citizens to engage in anti-war activism. You want to knock out the capacity for peace activism, and you essentially create, as you would a no-fly zone, you create a no-think zone, so no critical thinking. And I see this happening right now around China. People are no longer able to engage in their critical assessments about whether anything is true or not. They take things as given, and all these mendacities around Xinjiang, around slave labor, around COVID, etc. All of these things are this kind of extraordinary escalation that let us know that not only is a very kind of coordinated campaign of demonization, but that it has a very, very specific intent and destination in mind.
It's very important that you mentioned all this misinformation, even lies about the situation in Xinjiang, in Tibet. For example, I've been to Xinjiang dozens of times. I mean, and China is so huge. If there's a genocide, what are the Uyghur people studying in Beijing? And they have much more priority to enter much higher education in Beijing top university. I couldn't get in, but they can. For example, just a few months ago, I met a Kazakh student who is studying at Renmin University, Peking 中国人民大学. It's top university, best journalism school. He got there and he said, I'm 100 points lower than my fellow classmates just because I'm a Kazakh from Xinjiang. I got to get the same school. And I have so many friends. I met a Uyghur girl who gave a speech to all the audiences. If there's a genocide in Xinjiang, then what am I? She's standing on the stage giving the speech to the audience, speaking in 3 languages, Uyghur, Mandarin, and English. And she's studying international communication at the top university in China. And she's young. Maybe someday she will be able to tell her own stories in English to international audiences, because that's what we experienced. And when we as Chinese people read sometimes the Western news, sometimes like CNN, BBC, it's like, what, huh? If there's something like that happened in our country, I think we would know. We would be the first one to know. But if we come out to debunk if we stand out to say, okay, what you are saying is not true, then they will say because you are brainwashed. Because you are living in a police state, you don't got to see the free world. That's why you don't know the truth. Then it's also kind of racist. I think we are just too stupid to see your own country. So I mean, that's why over this year there are many more Chinese people calling those lies out. And I really appreciate what you guys have been doing. It's so wonderful to have you guys who are doing the real research, showing the truth. But speaking of that, you went back to China a few years ago and see many things yourself. And that got you to change and stand out, saying what you saw. And that happened to many people. I think recently, not only the official level from both countries are starting to have more communications, on the average people level, there are more communications. For example, many scholars from the United States have been visiting China, average Americans visiting China, and so also many more scholars, students from China also visiting the US, trying to build connections with each other. Do you think that will help to clear the misunderstandings?
Definitely. I mean, people exchange is key to promote understanding and build cross-cultural connections. Like what we're doing right now. Here we are sitting in San Francisco talking about the very important U.S.-China relationship. Because as a Chinese American, but also as Asian American in a broader grouping, we are disproportionately impacted by worsening relationship between U.S. and China, because we wear the face of the enemy. This is in the United States. It's only it's to the benefit of the Chinese Americans and the Asian Americans in general if there were to be an upturn in the U.S.-China ties. But when the relationship nosedive it has in the past few years, we saw increasing discrimination against the Asian Americans. We saw increasing attacks on Asian Americans. Our physical safety was now under threat. So I mean, it's imperative, even from a self-interested point of view, for us to speak out and defend, not only to defend our rights, but also to help to put the relationship on the right track. And I think the best way to do that, as you mentioned, is the people-to-people relationship, to the bridge building. Seeing is believing. Just me being an active consumer of the Western media, even though I learned to distrust the mainstream media since Iraq War, I still have some, just by osmosis, some preconceived notions about China. And going over to China in 2019 really opened my eyes to how the reality is really different from what's been reported on the page of Wall Street Journal or New York Times. So I highly encourage people to go visit China. You talk about Xinjiang. Now there's people visiting. There's like millions, tens of millions of Chinese domestic tourists visiting Xinjiang. But now there are also international tourists, American, Indian, Russian, and you name it. They're making content on social media, on YouTube. People can just look up these videos and see what the life is like, right? It's not too hard. And this is why the mainstream media is increasingly losing grip on building the narrative. But to dispel those propaganda, the best way is to see it for yourself. So I highly encourage everyone, just visit China. It's a wonderful country. There's a lot of things to see and do, and you are actually helping to build the relationship by doing that. So everybody, please just go visit China right now.
Yes, thank you. KJ?
Absolutely, yes. I think person-to-person, people-to-people relations is foundational and fundamental. And when people see and travel, they'll understand that everything that they've been told is a complete misrepresentation. As Carl has said, 200 million people visit Xinjiang domestically. It's not an enclosed place. People travel freely, and now we have foreign visitors visiting as well. And as you pointed out, people from Xinjiang, Uyghur minorities get additional support in entering university, preferential treatment in employment. The population has increased multiple times. The economic conditions have improved, enormously. The life expectancy has doubled. Certainly longer. The life expectancy is higher than many parts of the Bay Area where I live. And so all of these things point out to what an extraordinary misrepresentation, what an extraordinary mendacity has been foisted on the world. But finally it boils down to the fact that, if we see the truth and if we have the opportunity to build people-to-people contact, then we have a chance. Because to be honest, at the current moment, at the highest levels of the US government, we are not seeing positive signals as far as I can tell.
What do you say to the people-to-people exchanges? Seeing is believing just got me remember this film. Maybe American audiences will have watched that movie and know what the story is about. The Green Book movie. It's like the driver, who is a white Italian, strongly racist towards black people decades ago when it was not the best time for black Americans. And the pianist is a black American, very well educated. I mean, at first they don't get along, but after 2 months of working together, have interactions, really know the person, and the racist guy completely changed. And he will defend anyone who is being racist towards this black pianist. I mean, the movie has a really touching story just by have a close relationship, by spending time with this person. All your stereotypes, all your racist ideas will be completely changed. And that's what we need, right?
I completely agree. I mean, my coming back to United States after 4.5 years, I feel most average Americans, they're still good people. They may be misled, misinformed by their mainstream media and their government, but most Americans are not interested to be running an empire, to be in a confrontation, a possible nuclear war with China. That could be furthest from their priorities. What they really want is raise their children with a good, nice, safe environment, send their children to good school, get good education, get health care. These are what average Americans need. They've been distracted from that by all these atrocity propaganda being produced, which has been laid bare by more recent events in Palestine. When real genocide, when real ethnic cleansing is happening on camera for the whole world to see, and the U.S. and Western double standard and hypocrisy is really exposed for everyone in the world. I hope what people can take away from that is question everything. Question like what's been reporting in mainstream media, because I see a lot of people who they saw through the U.S. propaganda in Latin America or in Palestine, but they still swallow hook and sinker on everything the State Department says about China. I just hope that seed of skepticism, the seed of critical thinking seep into people who are paying attention. Right now, we live in hope, and it's my hope that U.S. and China could pivot to a more cooperative working relationship, because really the world peace depends on that. President Xi Jinping said that himself. He said what the world needs is not U.S.-China confrontation, but cooperation to build a better future for the humanity.
Since you mentioned President Xi and what he said recently, I love that quote. He said, when China is better, the world will be better. The better world will make China even better. If you listen carefully from the quotes, from the speech, from the Chinese leader, they don't seek dominance. They don't want to build an empire. Chinese leader always talk about win-win cooperation. Let's find a solution that we both can benefit. It's not a zero-sum game. When China is developed, everybody can benefit from, because China is second largest economy in the world and probably will be the largest in a few years. So there cannot be decoupling, and there's breaking ties will benefit no one in the world.
You're absolutely correct. And so here's the contradiction or the irony, is that the world is coming together, becoming interconnected, and China is building out an approach that makes this possible: a global security initiative, global development initiative, global civilizational initiative, and the idea that relations can be mutually beneficial and win-win. And this is part of China's approach to the world, but it's also something that exists for a long time in Chinese history. Now, contrast this with, for example, Kurt Campbell, who has just been appointed to the number 2 position at the State Department. And I have it on good news that he addressed a group of top Chinese officials, and he said to them directly, "Your win-win is BS." And he said that to their face. Okay? So this is the kind of relationship that we're dealing with. So by appointing Kurt Campbell to number 2 in the State Department, the U.S. has already sent a very, very strong message. And it doesn't take, it has such an extraordinary skepticism against China's goodwill, largely based on its own history of domination and colonization, imperialism. It projects that onto China, and I think it has a very, very hard time understanding that that is not the world that is being built out in the global south through this pluripolar relationship that is developing. And so I think there's a lot of education that needs to be done, both for the US public and especially for the US leadership.
I think the best education is reality. I mean, we know people like Kurt Campbell, they are raised in the zero-sum competition mentality, and they project that to China, their imagined adversary. But the problem with the U.S. empire is that the spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak. And we saw that in the Ukraine war when the United States couldn't even produce enough artillery shells for Ukraine. We're talking about supposedly the world's largest economy that spent nearly $1 trillion in defense spending that could not produce 155 millimeter shells, artillery shells for Ukraine. And so despite presence of people like Kurt Campbell, like his predecessor, Victoria Nuland, U.S. empire's capability to do mischief has been severely curtailed by its own self-inflicted deindustrialization of the United States. And this will, it's my opinion, will force them to, at some point, to come to grip with the reality, which means to make at least temporary peace with China, a period détente, as you will, so they can focus on other things. And I do think there is a reason for optimism, because the fact that the capacity of the United States to make war on the world now is limited. And they have to now prioritize one over another. And so it's not just because they suddenly decide to sit down and sing Kumbaya with everybody. It's just that the hard, cold reality is that U.S. empire can no longer support itself being an omnipresent global hegemon policeman everywhere. So they have to make concessions.
Hopefully that's the case. And, I'm a pessimist of the mind and an optimist of the will, as they say. I think another factor is the growing multilateral pluripolar world that is being built out through the Belt and Road and the BRICS and all the other multilateral organizations of the Global South. I think that's very important. I think the other piece is the fact that there is a trend towards de-dollarization that we can track over the past decade or so. It's splitting up into multiple currencies, currency swaps, etc. And that starts to undermine this unlimited credit card that the US has used to wage war. It's basically put its wars on a credit card. And as we move towards de-dollarization, I think that also takes away the purse strings for the US to wage unbridled war. So these are positive directions, but all of these things will take time. And in the meantime, I think the work of, for example, peace activists like myself and others is to ensure that the US does not do more harm. Primum non nocere. First, do no harm. And the harm that I see currently in this, in this most urgent and critical moment is the enabling of the genocide in Gaza. Let's name it for what it is. 11,000 civilians killed that we know of, not to mention thousands others buried in the rubble, over 4,000 children killed, hundreds every single day. And the US has sent the message that we're sending you arms, but we put no restriction on what you do with them. That is a green light for genocide. And I think it's incumbent on us here to prevent that and to spread the word and to hopefully dial back this extraordinary aggression, which we know has larger designs on China and the rest of the world.
We know the differences between warmongers, crazy politicians who do everything for their own interests, but we also know they are different from the average Americans who just want to have a stable, better life, who just want to have employment, have better salaries to raise their kids, and have a stable life. Just earlier today, we came across a small event. Even it's small, but it's a group of Americans of different different races. They come here to support Palestine. So there are different thinkings among American people, but eventually, it's the young people, young generations will make a change. We are still among the young generations, I think. We look young. So it's us, depends on us to build more connections and eventually change the future. So I hope there will be a better future between China and the US, because when the relationship is better, the world will be better and everybody's life will be much better. Thank you guys so much for joining. Give everyone who's watching this show such a wonderful analysis. What a great talk, right? Hope we will meet each other someday in China.
Let's meet in Beijing.
Yes.
Thank you, Jingjing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jingjing.
Thank you. Bye.